Hi everybody, I wanted to go ahead and make a video today so that I could use this resource to explain some of the items that we're going over in chapter 5.2 with the comma. One of the things that you saw in your reading is that the comma is the most misused punctuation mark. And it's the one where I think people have the most concern about how to use it. There's a lot of misconceptions. When I'm grading papers, it tends to be the one punctuation mark where I notice a lot of people using it the wrong way and not a whole lot of continuity with how people are using it the wrong way. So I've developed this resource to go over some of the right ways to use the comma and some of the ways that I've seen that students are using it incorrectly. This should supplement both the reading in your book as well as the PowerPoint presentation that you can find in the course documents, and you can also find this handout in the course documents. So let's make some comma sense, and let's look at avoiding some of the comma pitfalls. So the first thing we're going to look at, example number 1, is using a comma after an introductory element. So you do want to use a comma after an introductory element. That can be an introductory word, an introductory phrase, or an introductory clause. For example, you look at this sentence right here. This is laughing at the joke. Marissa asked Jake if he was always this funny. And we have the comma right here after the introductory element. This makes sense because we know that Marissa is the one who is laughing at the joke, and this is also an introductory element that is not essential for the rest of the sentence to make sense. But you don't use a comma in this case. You don't use a comma after a gerund. So laughing at the joke is the polite thing to do. In this example, when laughing at the joke is used as the noun, is used as the subject of the sentence. It's considered a gerund. And the sentence would not make sense if we took away this element. So you don't want to use a comma here. It's not an introductory element. Right? And there's also something that we discussed last week in this example with an indirect question. So Marissa asked Jake if he was always this funny, and as you noticed from last week, we're ending this with a period and not a question mark because it's an indirect question. All right, let's move on to example 2. Example 2 is where I see a lot of people are not really sure what to do. The right way to do this is you want to use a comma before a coordinating conjunction when the coordinating conjunction connects two independent clauses. So in this example over here, we have two independent clauses. She wants to go to the movie is independent clause number 1. But she doesn't have time for dinner is independent clause number 2. And right here connecting those, you have a coordinating conjunction, but. So you place the comma. See how many ways that we can highlight these. Place the comma right here in the red. She wants to go to the movie, comma, but she doesn't have time for dinner. In this case, what's highlighted in yellow and what's highlighted in green can both stand alone on their own. Both of those could be sentences. They both have a subject and a verb. Because they are conjoined by this coordinating conjunction, we use a comma and then the coordinating conjunction. Where I see some error is sometimes I see students doing this. You never put the comma after the coordinating conjunction. So we're going to go ahead and undo that. They're right back here. I also see some students doing this. She wants to go to the movie. She doesn't have time for dinner. Now that's almost right, but we've omitted something important. We've omitted the coordinating conjunction. And as we discussed when we were doing the overview at the beginning of this class, if you do this, this is not grammatical and it's called a comma splice. You need a coordinating conjunction in here if you want to use a comma to separate these sentences. There is a couple of different grammatical ways that we can do this without the coordinating conjunction. We can use a semicolon, or we can turn them into two different sentences. But this is not correct. If you want to know what coordinating conjunctions you can use, a very easy acronym is the acronym FANBOYS: for, and, or, but, nor, but, or, yet, so. The acronym FANBOYS can help you remember which coordinating conjunctions you can use with a comma to separate two independent clauses. And the other mistake that I often see in this area is do not use a comma every time you see a coordinating conjunction. So I know some students think, oh, you know what, I see a for. That means I have to put a comma there. Or I see an and. That means I need a comma there. But in this example here, she and I want to go to the movie. You see an and right here. But this is not, oh, that's really dark. But this is not, the and here is not joining two independent clauses. Instead, this is a compound subject. So in this case, you don't need a comma just because there's the word and. It's not conjoining two independent clauses. So it's okay to leave it as it is. No punctuation needed. There's also a rule in your book that discusses when you might not need to use a comma if there are fewer than 4 words when each independent clause is fewer than 4 words. I brought this up in my example of where I saw a grammar mistake when I posted that to the forum, and I said you could also post to the forum if you saw a grammar mistake, because there's a lot of argument about that. Some grammar books say that even if both independent clauses are less than 4 words, you still need to use the comma and a coordinating conjunction, and then other grammar books say otherwise. But just to show you an example down here. So the one from your textbook is, I rode, but he walked. And in this case, let's take that highlighting off. I rode and he walked are both independent clauses, and they are conjoined by but because each of them has fewer than 4 words, this grammar book says you do not need to use a comma before the but here. So you don't need that in this case. All right, let's move on to example 3. So in example 3, we want to use a comma to set off a non-restrictive phrase or non-restrictive clause. These are clauses or phrases that add information that's not essential to the meaning of the sentence. Oftentimes they begin with who or which. So in this case, Mr. Jones, who is a Bears fan, told me about the Comcast deal. One way to test for this is if you were to cross out the non-essential or non-restrictive clause, Mr. Jones told me about the Comcast deal. It still makes sense, so likely we're going to set that off by commas. But you don't want to use a comma with a restrictive phrase or clause. A restrictive phrase or clause is essential to the meaning of a sentence. So for example here, the Bears fan is the one who always gets to me. So in this case, the Bears fan is how we are identifying the person who gets to the speaker or who's bothering the speaker. And so we need that because otherwise the sentence doesn't make sense. It's unclear. All right, so we're going to move on then to example 4, which is the appositive. And you do want to use a comma to set off an appositive. So in my example here, Ms. Stamper, the grocer, is preparing the vegetable tray. In this case, the grocer is a noun that provides a different renaming of Miss Stamper. So in this case, you set that off by appositive, or you set the appositive off by commas. However, you don't want to use a comma when the appositive is only one word. So in this case, my friend John is preparing the vegetable tray. You don't do this because the appositive here is only one word. John is renaming my friend. That does make sense. But we don't set it off with commas because it's just one word. All right, and we'll look at our last example here. Example 5, you want to use a comma to separate items in a series. So your homework, quiz, and reading must be completed by Sunday. We use a comma to separate each of these items in a series. But you don't use a comma with the items in a series when they are separated by conjunctions. So your homework and the quiz and the reading must be completed by Sunday. Now, I would say that that's a little awkward, and if I were reading that in someone's paper, I would suggest that they revise it to this over here, because I think that this is a little bit clearer and has a better cohesion to it. But this is grammatically correct because of all the conjunctions. You don't need to use a comma there. There is some debate about this comma right here, which is called the serial comma. And in some cases, some grammar books tell you to omit the serial comma, and it's more common in certain styles of writing and in certain countries. However, this grammar book argues, as I also believe, that it is clearer if you include the serial comma. Otherwise, there can be some mistaken meaning here. And in fact, I have posted to the announcements an example of where a missing serial comma actually ended up costing a company some money because it was found in court that it made the meaning of an employee handbook unclear. So, an example of why punctuation matters. All right, so this is my 5 examples of some common mistakes in comma usage and the correct way to handle all of those. I have included this resource in the course materials, and I hope you use it as a supplement to the PowerPoint and the reading to help you make some comma sense.